Welcome to another episode of the Power Law Investor. Today is September 30th, 2024, a Monday, and we'll be discussing how the daily dollar cost averaging using the power laws is coming along. And we'll talk about the power law and Kaspa in particular, which is what you guys have commented that you'd like to know more about. And again, this is not financial advice, it's for informational purposes only. So, as a reminder, the power law is simply a trend line in log space that has done a really good job of mathematically describing how the prices of these two assets, Bitcoin and Kaspa, have occurred in time. So here in this particular graph, you can see that the blue line over here is the price in log space, and the orange line is the trend line. It's a mathematically derived trend line. There's no guesswork involved in it. It's relatively simple mathematics based on linear regression, and you guys can also do it at home. Maybe I'll make a video on how you can do it yourself if there's enough interest. But essentially, this line has done a really good job of predicting how prices have been moving in the past. And the R squared is about 0.9557, which means more than 95% of the variation in price has been explained by this line. And similarly, we have something similar for Kaspa. Again, the shape looks a little different, but again, the R squared fit is a very good fit, even though the equation is a little different. And when we take these lines in the log space and convert them to linear space, we end up with a curved line that looks like this. So similarly for Kaspa, when we go into linear space, we end up with these curved upward pointing curved lines. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But today we're looking at Bitcoin. Again, like I said, Bitcoin and Kaspa. Bitcoin is trading around 63,500 and Kaspa is just trading above 16 cents. And what we've been doing in this experiment is every day we've been taking $100 over here, the daily DCA amount, and we've been splitting it amongst these three assets over here. So 20% we've been allocating to cash for opportunities that may come if prices drop. And then this algorithm that I've developed focuses on splitting the remaining 80% between Bitcoin and Kaspa, depending on what the risk reward ratio is and also how confident we are. Because Bitcoin has been around for almost about 15 years at this point, we have a lot more data and a lot more reliability of the power law. Whereas with Kaspa, it's been around 3 years, less than that. So the data, we have much less data, so we can trust it far less. So we have to weigh out the higher risk and reward potential versus the reliability. And that's what the algorithm does. And so the algorithm produces an output like this. This is the allocation for today. And the Kaspa expected return is about 470% with a current price of 0.163. It's a little different because it has picked the price up from yesterday, just the timing of the day, but it's generally going to be in the right ballpark. The Bitcoin annual expected return for 1 year ahead is about 67%. So the algorithm is allocated about 60%, 59.2% towards Kaspa because we have more bang for the buck, and about 20% to Bitcoin. And so, as we can see, that has changed a little bit over time. There have been times when we were almost at a, let's say, a 56% allocation to Kaspa, or even lower, a 55, depending on what the price is. But this dynamically adjusts because the power law is changing all the time. Not the line is changing all the time, but the value, we're moving further and further up along the line. So that gives us, it dynamically adjusts to wherever we are and gives us an allocation based upon that. And so, like I said, the allocation today is about 60, 20, and 20. And if you've been following this, we've been doing this for starting on the 19th, so it's been a little over a month at this point. And the performance has been reasonable. We're still positive. We don't really have a massive amounts of gains that we've made, but we have made some primarily on the Bitcoin side. The Kaspa price hasn't moved quite as much, but you can see following this strategy allows us to buy more when the price is low and buy less when the price is high, and shifts between the two. So let's talk a little bit about where we are with these power laws. We'll start off with Bitcoin first, right? Currently, we're about 65,500, and based on the power law, the expected 12-month return is about 67%, which is quite good compared to what you'd be getting in the stock market. This says that we are at a discount to the trend of 15%, meaning that if we zoom in over here, this is where we should be if we were following the power law exactly, but we're about here. So this distance is about 16% drop. And when the prices drop down, our assumption is that the past is going to be, or the future is going to be like the past. So we expect the price to rise up and hit the average or the trend line, and that gives us an additional benefit in terms of a higher return. So with Kaspa, with Bitcoin, we can see that we're 65,500. We might drop down lower, and I think this is one of the things to think about, which I'll discuss a little bit later. But at 65,000, you're expecting about a 67% return. And as you know, the price had dropped down into the low 50s a couple of weeks ago. At that point, the return would have been considerably higher because we're assuming that we're going to get back to the trend line. So we're here. If we drop down lower, it's going to be a bigger percentage increase to get there, right? Now, the interesting part is what's happening with Kaspa. Here is the line in the log space, but when we look at Kaspa right now, the expected return is around 470%. Now, this is not just a consequence of how much of a discount it's trading, but also how steep the power law line is. So relative to Bitcoin, Kaspa is much earlier in the cycle, and you can look at this particular equation that we have. Even though this power, the exponent, is 4.01 compared to Bitcoin, which is at 5.71, because we're earlier in the cycle, there's more upward room. It's accelerating at a faster, or it's increasing at a faster rate. So if we believe the power law and we think the future is going to be like the past, you can expect, close to 5 times your return on what you've put in over the year. So if we zoom in a little bit over here, then here, let me just zoom out, and then we're going to zoom into this section over here. And you can see what's been happening is that the line has been trending below the power law line for quite a bit. In fact, this purple dotted line here represents a minus 40% to the trend line. Now, generally, when you dip down into the minus 40, between the minus 40 and minus 50%, it's a good buying opportunity because the price doesn't stay down there very long. Now, of course, I can't predict what happens short term. I can't even predict what happens long term. But I can say that I do have a lot of faith in the power law because it's derived by mathematics that we can all agree on. And if we make the assumption, and it's a big assumption, but I think it's a reasonable one, that the future is going to be like the past, then there's a good probability that we get back to the trend line. And if we do get back to the trend line, we're looking at results in 6 months of about 226% and about 470% in a year's time. So now you can understand, given that we have such a large expected return, while the algorithm is prioritizing Kaspa, it's pulling us more towards the Kaspa triangle rather than the Bitcoin side, because the bang for the buck, even though the reliability is less, is so much more. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening with Kaspa, because one of the things that I found interesting was, given that this has been bouncing below the trend line for quite a while, is the power law broken? Or what's changing? Why is it bouncing down underneath that? And I think there's a lot of different short-term factors. It could be influenced by Bitcoin. It could be influenced by the general market trend. And we can get a little bit of insight into that by looking at what happens over here on this chart, which is showing Kaspa divided by Bitcoin. So this is the price of Kaspa divided by the price of Bitcoin. Now, as you can see, it has bounced around quite a bit. So when it's high, that means Kaspa has a higher value relative to Bitcoin based on what the history has been. And as you can see, that this price has gone all the way up here, then all the way down here, then all the way up here. So this is not unusual for what we're seeing. We've been lower than that in the past, and then we've been bouncing up also. Interestingly, this line, the ratio between Kaspa and Bitcoin, is also a power law. And it might be something for me to look at in the future and actually draw out the power law and see how we're doing. But right now, whatever the power law is, and you can visually see this, that we are trending on the lower side. We haven't shot up as yet. And oftentimes, the psychology of this is that the time to buy is when we're most uncomfortable. I find that you're going to be uncomfortable at a couple of points, right? Either you're being uncomfortable when you're buying, or you're going to experience uncomfort after you've bought and the price changes. So our psychology as human beings is that we're driven towards getting on. The fear kicks in when the price drops down. Oh my God, the price will drop down even more. or the greed kicks in when the price is going up. Oh my God, I better jump in because else I'll get left behind. And really, what we should be doing is the opposite. Now, if we're following the power law and we believe that it works, the power law is telling us that right now we're underneath the trend line, so it's a good time to buy. Now, we can look at the Kaspa price action and say it really hasn't done too much over the last couple of months. But if you take a step back, you can see, if you zoom in all the way over here, we had about a 6-month period from November through April in which we were above the trend line. And now maybe we have a 6-month period in which we're below the trend line. And you can draw all sorts of technical analysis line, but I'm just trying to use the power law because that's the one that makes the most sense to me. And I would say prices can move very quickly. So again, by using this DCA strategy over here, we continue to buy at these lower time points or lower price points. And we also have this funding available in order to deploy if the price drops down a little further. So historically, this area between the 40 and 50% is a really good time to get into Kaspa. So the minus 50% is around 14 cents. So anything between 16 and a half and 14 cents is a pretty good opportunity. So if we do get a couple of downdrafts and we hit 15 cents or even 14 cents, that's why we have all this capital ready to go. I have these limit orders previously placed at 13 and a half and 12 and a half cents, but I will probably update them to have them to be buying at around 14 cents and maybe 14 and a half cents. I think that would be a good buying opportunity. Another chart that we can look at is understanding how Kaspa is doing relative to the other altcoins in the market. So this is looking at the Kaspa market cap divided by the altcoin market cap, excluding, so you've from the crypto market cap, you've removed Bitcoin and Ethereum and USDT and USDC. And as you can see, we are now sort of trading at the lower part of what we've seen for the last few months, right? This ratio has dropped down. So the higher this value goes, the more Kaspa is picking up steam relative to the altcoin market. So Kaspa has been underperforming the rest of the altcoin market since about, the last 3 weeks, two weeks or so. So could it go down further? Absolutely. But it could also reverse at this point. And I don't know that about short term what will happen, but I do have this mathematical trend line, and it tells me that now is a good time to buy. And that really is the purpose of this experiment, right? To share with you guys how we can use the power law to not just use the power law to buy one asset, but also shift between the two assets of Bitcoin and Kaspa. So that's kind of where we are at this point. My expectation is that what happens in Bitcoin is really going to determine what impacts the rest of the market. We've had the rate cut from the Fed. But last time, in 2019, when we had the rate cut, the price of Bitcoin dropped down considerably. And just because we've had the rate cut doesn't mean that, it's the altcoin season has started as yet. What did change the direction in 2019 is when the Fed started quantitatively easing, right? And so right now they're still in quantitative tightening mode. I think there's a good chance we might see lower prices for the next few weeks, maybe even months. But sooner or later, I think that sort of transition happens. And if you're using the power law to invest both systematically on a day-to-day basis, but also have cash reserves in case we get some lower prices, that puts us in a great position. So as always, time will tell. I can't predict the future. I don't think you can, otherwise you wouldn't be listening to me here either. But I wish you a fantastic week, and we'll see how things turn out. So all the best, and see you around.